to that, or
I have checked
broadcast
the
is
box
live.
that allows co-streaming.
You are live. Does that mean that I went live? I don't know. Let's just
Shall
go.
I? Yeah, let's just go. I can look at your channel now live on your channel.
Am I live on my channel too?
I would have to start up a separate
Yeah,
Chrome window.
it is. It's live now.
It's okay. Okay, nice.
We're experimenting with new modes here in StreamYard.
Yeah, but I think to work, one of us must have a paid account. I don't know whether you have the free one or the paid one.
I'm still using the freebie.
For me, it's business expenses. So I think what I will do is sometimes just stream when I program something.
Yeah. Do you live stream while you program?
Not yet, but I plan to do in the future. I
Yeah,
don't know
I
whether
do some of
this.
that. I don't live stream it. I record it, and then I edit it together.
Yeah.
So I can speed up the boring parts,
Yeah.
and to be honest, I skip over the parts where I mess up.
That is what I would not plan to do, but maybe if I tried, I might do it. I might even do it, yes. Okay, so I said I would start with the same questions I had for McToon,
All right, what's
and
your question?
it's a little bit also from my own experience when I will tell this. And do you remember as a child when the first time you suspected your parents don't tell you the truth, and not just that it were probably lies or so, but that your parents explained something to you which they obviously believed, and leave religion and such things out from the topic, which they thought it is right, but you understood it cannot work how they tell, and they probably tell because they don't want to appear to be stupid, and don't want to say I don't really know how it is. Do you remember such a thing in maybe age 6 or 10 or older? Or did your parents always
Hmm.
say if they didn't know something, sorry, I don't know?
I reflecting back, I'm trying to come up with something. I definitely, I mean, like there's the Santa Claus thing is a easy go
Yeah.
to, but
No,
but
more
it's not really the same thing.
in the technical or science field, where your parents obviously believed in something wrong, not religious, but obviously they couldn't do something, and they tried, and they don't want to admit they can't.
Yeah, to be honest, my memory capabilities are weak. But I would say the only thing I can really contribute to that is adjacent, and that's my first grade teacher. I remember my first grade teacher um, didn't know how to spell the word no, like as in to know something,
Hmm.
and I was pretty shocked by that. She thought the word no started with a K, which was ridiculous. Um, I
Hmm.
remember that, but
Okay.
I mean, of course, in case there's anyone who hasn't caught on, she was right. I was wrong. But I was entirely convinced of my own superiority. So, I mean, based on that memory, I assume that means that I often questioned what adults were telling me at that age. But yeah, I can't think of anything specific. I really can't.
Mhm. For me, it may explain my professional career, why it went, why it went, how it went. And of course, letting off the religious stuff, there was also, when I was 10 or 12, there were many doubts that what the teacher tells us can be true. And I'm probably an atheist in my heart since I'm 12 or so, at least. I gave up with it, but I was very shy to tell this because my two sisters are very religious, and my parents did not force religion up to me, but they obviously also believed in this. But the experience I want to tell about, and which has something to do with electricity and electric circuits, was I think I was about age 8 or maybe so, like this. And at Christmas, for 4 weeks or so, we 3 kids had doll houses. You know, these little houses where we had little dolls in, and I had a shop, grocery shop for this. And my father put lights in this, which we had a battery and little 3 or 5 volt incandescent light bulb, and they wired it, and we had switches. We could switch it on and off. And I asked my father if he can do the same as we had in our hall, where we had one light and 2 switches on each side. And then he tried with the switches he had, which only were on-off switches. And of course, meanwhile, since long, I know you can't do it with just on-off switches. You need Umschalter.
3 ways or whatever you want to call
3
them.
ways, yeah, 3-way. And I understood as a child he can't do it, and he tried and tried, and it was either an or an and, so both had to be off, or one, it was sufficient one. And this spawned my interest in knowing how this works. And I then, as a kid, I became such Baukästen. It's a assortment of switches, and so with a little book where you can do your experiments, and the first one for electricity and the next one for radio frequency stuff, very simple experiments you can do. And of course, knowing how these 2-way switches work and how you have to wire them together is something I sometimes ask people who even know the basics of house in the electricity in the house. And I'm very astonished that most of them can't do the 3-switch circuit, where you have 3. And McToon told me that he did all the wiring in his house himself, and he finally he got it with a plan how to wire this, that it works, because today in such situations you have bistable relays usually, and just a momentary switch which switches is on and off. And probably in some years from now, we have all our houses are with smart home, and this is all programmed with which you will use for which light. Could you do it, the 3-switch thing from your memory?
That's funny. If I have proper wiring and proper switches, I can do it. I've done it a few times.
Okay.
But in my house, the electrician that wired this house was insane. I don't understand what he did, and I cannot replicate it. I can't fix it. We have a light in the front room that there are 3 switches that control it.
Okay.
And I believe 2 of them are an OR gate, and the other one is an exclusive OR gate on there. And so it's either one is up and the other 2 are down, then the light is on. Or if the one is down and the other 2 are up, the light is on. And yeah, I mean, like, for example, right here, the light in my office, we replaced that switch, and so I can do that. But when I open up all the 3-way lights in the house, they don't have. They're obviously not up to code. They don't have what I would expect, which is, you have the hot coming in, and you have a ground, and then you'll need a load, and you'll need the other wire. I've forgotten what they call it. Basically, it's an exclusive OR gate, right? Where the load comes and either goes up around you know, like let's say white, it'll come in like black and go white, white to the other switch,
Mm-hmm.
and then return to the thing. Or you can flip flop them and go through the other
Mm-hmm.
route. I have no understanding of how they did it, but they're short a wire. Somehow they don't have all the wires
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah,
I would
probably. Yeah,
understand.
yeah, yeah.
So there's another way, but I don't know how.
Mhm. It's basically if you have the right wires, you the first and the last switch need just simple three-way switches, and the middle ones just need to do either feed through parallel or across the wires. And that switches, if you have the turning type of switches, can be very easily constructed. If you have the 4 poles, and these are the 2 wires, both maybe the hot wire from the first switch,
Mm-hmm.
and these are the two that go through, and you cross them if they go, and the switch has 2 bridges, which either are that way or that way if you turn it.
Mm-hmm.
So effectively,
Mm-hmm.
it just connects in parallel if the bridges are that way, and if they are vertical, because you have crossed the
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the leaving wires,
Uh-huh.
they really do cross over the wires. So
Mm-hmm.
at each position where you can do the switching, if you turn that switch, the wires cross over or get through parallel, so that finally either the hot wire comes through or it does not come through. The last switches are these three-way switches always. And between these, the first and the last one, you need 2 wires, which either get crossed over at each position or fit through parallel. That's and I think few electricians today know this, the new ones. Okay, but
Yeah, probably I don't know how to do it the old way either. I think it's the
yeah.
moral of the story.
The difficult thing is that you really need to put in the right wiring in the walls, and if you do these bistable relays, you only need to have 1 wire to the central position where the relay is, which throws it in one or in the
Yeah.
on or off position.
Okay.
And these are easier to wire, easier to do. And here where I live, all the three-way things, where we have 3 switches, we have one. I think several ones are, there are even 1, 2, 3, 4, and these are done in the new way with these relays that switch on and off. And okay, and this was my experience with the three-way switch that my father couldn't do, and it was not his problem. He just tried, and I understood at the age of 8 that I should not press him further, and later
So
I
that's when
learned
you
how this
learned
works.
that dad doesn't know everything. Huh?
Yeah. And another thing that may have led to what I do, because I do a lot of teaching, and maybe I'm more a teacher than a software developer. So I also developed some serious pieces of software in my professional career, is that I found a geometry book a little bit earlier before we covered this in school. And it was about sinus and cosine and so on. And it was I was not quite at that level with math, but I was close enough to understand this book. And I even discovered some errors in it, which probably were more or less typos or bad proofreading or so. It was not something the author thought is wrong. And when I returned this book to the library, it was a library for young people, not an ordinary library in a location where typically young people between 12 and 15 met. And there was a library, and when I returned it, I had a list of things which were wrong. And the librarian first were a little bit reluctant when I said, this needs to be corrected. There's a wrong in this book. But I was that convincing that she then even took my corrections and wrote them in the book. She obviously did not understand what she did, but I was convincing enough, probably at age 13 or so. Which age do you teach trigonometry in school in US?
7th or 8th grade, which is 13. I'm gonna say about
Yeah.
13.
about this. Yes.
Yeah.
And that may explain my fascination with doing geometry
So let me.
things. Usually, I'll try to do it in mental only. And it's a way to at some point I like to put it in a spreadsheet, but and sometimes I need my drawings a little bit, and but it's a way for me if I can't get sleep or so, if I think about a math problem, it
It's like
works.
counting sheep for you, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
Your sheep have trigonometric values on them.
Yeah. Depending on how much time we have left, I can later show you this spreadsheet I did for the curve of the horizon. But let's now come to the center part of this talk.
Okay.
And just I tell you how it went that I came to these thoughts I have, and I go through it sequentially, my own learning process. And it was interesting insofar as I am always open to be corrected. And it was on a channel where our friends discussed flat Earth stuff. And one of the claims that was the usual claim that was made and then defeated by the owner of this channel was how can it be that gravity is that strong that it keeps all the oceans in, but not a butterfly from flying? I think it was made in the comment thread too, because I didn't watch the full video of it. And then some non-flat earther, a globe defender, came with the argument, which I think is a bad argument. It is because the butterfly is a living thing and can spend energy. And maybe because of these experiences I told, I always looking for counter arguments, even if they try to argue for my position. But I always look for counter arguments with that things can fly. And my answer to this with the oceans and the butterfly is that the force of gravity to 1 gram of ocean is exactly the same as to 1 gram of butterfly. This should be sufficient and not point to the butterfly as a living thing. And then I tried to come up with dead things that fly. And the first idea was just a dead butterfly that gets taken away with the wind. But then, because I was in Thailand then, I thought in the evening at the beaches, they sell these kites, maybe 0.5 meter in diameter. And if they are high enough, 10 meter or so, you can fix the line on the ground and they stay up. And then I remembered that work is force times displacement. And there's no displacement for the kite. And so I wrote a comment on this little very independent channel, something with science or Simon Den or so, I think is the name. And then someone answered and said, but still you need to spend energy so that it can stay up. And he came with the force equation. And I said, yes, I know the force equation, but it's the physical meaning, it's no work done. And then he said, yeah, but I have a feeling that work must be done. And because it has to stay up and nothing would stay up from alone. And so, and this was then finished there. And then someone else came. I think someone who also comments on your channel sometimes, and he came up very more reasonable and said at first, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think you are right with this. And now let's just tell me the full thought process that I have. Probably in physics, you did this experiment where you bounced a steel ball on a glass surface and counted how often it bounced and calculated the energy. And from there, I know that there is such a thing as elastic collisions, which really don't use energy because you just revert the velocity vector and you exchange momentum. And then my thought was, if you have something, maybe this glass wall, if you have it hanging vertical and it can move, and to kick such a ball about it, at first, until it is a little bit angled, it will get more angled, and therefore the ball loses some energy because it goes into the potential energy. But if you bombard it with balls and balls, finally it gets in a slightly inclined position. And if we now assume the circular cow in physics, that you really don't lose anything. Once it is inclined enough, the balls bounce back with the same speed with which they came in.
Okay.
There's a difficulty with the rotational momentum and so on. You probably also know this, but we
spherical cows.
Yeah, circular cows, and therefore I thought it must be the same with the kite. It's elastic collisions there, and they can't use energy from keeping the kite up. And then someone answered, yeah, but the friction the air molecules have on the kite would warm it up. And then I said, yeah, but what happens? It goes in an equilibrium at some point. And once the kite is warmed up and is in equilibrium, there is no more exchange of energy there. And I finally came a little bit back to the position they said, and it's really twofold, the answer at which I'm there. Of course, there must be higher pressure under the kite as above.
Right.
And this higher pressure must come from somewhere, so to keep it up. And then I at first compared the situation with a pneumatic cylinder. So when you put a weight in your pneumatic cylinder, the air gets depressed, and then it's just the bouncing air molecules against whatever closest there, and it doesn't lose heat or something. Yeah, it doesn't go down more and more because they lose heat there. It stays at a height. And meanwhile, my considerations are so far that, of course, if there were no wind, the kite couldn't stay up. But actually, the energy that keeps it up has been spent earlier to create the wind.
Okay, let me pause you for a second.
Yeah,
There's
I'm really.
Okay, you can finish. You finish. You finish. Go ahead.
I'm finished. The last thing I have to say would distract us a little bit. So just give me your view on this.
My view is that you made a mistake right in the beginning. And I think you know this already. It doesn't take any energy to hold something aloft.
Yeah, the first, when it rises, there goes energy, and this is clear. There's potential energy is in there.
So it gained energy from somewhere in order to rise up.
Yeah.
And of course, it took it from the wind.
Yeah. Okay, that's clear.
But then it can stay up there forever, and it's not. It does not take any energy.
Yeah, and this was always in my answers to this. Once it is a certain height and stays there, and we don't consider that it goes a little bit up and down. Just if it stays stable in a certain position, there's no more energy. These need to be elastic collisions.
No. Well, I mean, we're talking about an infinite wind source. The wind is the source of the energy to compensate for the losses.
Well, where is energy? Where is work done in this picture?
Against the drag. The drag that is being generated is, we're creating vortices up there.
Let's come back to this hanging glass plate. And permanently bouncing steel balls against it. It goes a little bit in this direction, goes a little bit inclined. And what work do the balls do now that bounce against this?
Well, if you take one ball at a time, shooting towards the plate, right?
Yeah, the continuous flow, many.
Well, let's take them one at a time, and then you'll see the work.
Until it is in this position. Okay.
Okay, so when one ball hits it, there's a momentum transfer.
Yeah.
And so there is an energy transfer where the energy goes from
momentum
the ball
transfer is not necessarily energy transfer. In this example, yes, once it goes in a more inclined position, so the center of gravity goes up a little bit.
Yes, so it's transferred some energy from the ball into the thing. The energy was lost and falls.
Okay.
and then good old gravity is going to pull the plate back down. If it was just one ball, it would be a transfer and back.
And then
so
it would,
continuous...
the circular cow would dictate then it swings forever between potential and kinetic energy, a permanent permanent exchange between the two. Okay.
Right.
And the energy is always here that the ball lost. We ignore friction, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So if you ignore friction for the kite, are we also ignoring induced drag?
What exactly is induced drag?
Well, okay, drag comes from two sources: the friction of an air molecule going across a surface.
Okay, we split the velocity vector in a part which is vertical to the surface and one which is parallel. Okay, and we talk about which one that is parallel to the surface.
Right,
not
and
one
so
that is vertical.
the one that's going parallel
to the,
when it's just going parallel as it moves across the surface.
Yeah. Okay.
You get losses. So there's losses there.
So that warms up the kite.
I think it more warms the air. It creates vortices in the air, disturbs the air, and it pulls away.
Warming air does not technically lose energy.
Oh, no energy is going to be lost in the system. It's just going to be blown away from the kite.
It's no work done.
It's not done on the kite. It's done on the air. Right?
Not quite sure, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you would consider an air molecule comes in with a certain momentum and it leaves with a different momentum, then work has been done on
it. Not necessarily. Momentum exchange. Momentum can be exchanged
if you hold mass
without doing work.
No. If you hold I don't think so. You can exchange, but you can't change. You cannot change an individual particle's momentum without doing work on it.
Elastic collisions can do so.
They trade. They do equal work on either object.
They exchange equal momentum. The total momentum in the system does not change.
The total momentum of the system, and if you're going to include the system, then all the air of the wind has to be part of that system. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, let's go back to the simpler thing with this hanging steel plate, and we leave this experiment alone. We have some cannon which shoots balls here, and it goes. I think we agree on that we go in a stable position. It's the same as in the pneumatic cylinder, which is kept up by bouncing air molecules from below, and they don't heat up anything.
Oh, yeah, perfect elasticity. I mean, molecules are almost perfectly elastic, so you get very little losses from that.
Yeah, and for the perpendicular component of the velocity vector, perpendicular to the kite, this is true. This is a elastic collision.
I don't think that it is.
Where is the work done? If the kite doesn't gain height, if the air does work on the kite, it have to go anywhere.
The air doesn't do any work on the kite because the kite does not move.
Okay.
So no work is done on the kite. But that doesn't mean that energy hasn't been extracted from the system.
Okay, now let's go down to this vertical.
Depending on what you define as the system, I think that's where we're getting confused.
Yeah.
I'm picturing a kite, and there's airflow coming in. Air comes in with a particular velocity and goes out with a different characteristic, a different kind of flow coming out. The air was diverted.
There's higher pressure below the kite as above.
But I mean, when the air leaves, the air flows, right? The air hits the kite, is diverted, and tumbles away.
Yeah.
Right. And so you would just call that heat, usually as a catch-all of just like wasted energy. So in that sense, no work was done, but energy was transformed from one kind to another, from the kinetic energy of the laminar flow of the molecules. Now they're in turbulent flow.
Yeah, okay.
So I would say that we just call that lost energy.
Yeah,
it's
that
not destroyed.
goes a
It's not
little
like we're
bit.
violating conservation of energy or anything. It's
Yeah,
just
that is clear
turning
to
from one
me. That
kind
is
to
clear to
another.
me. The point I think we confuse here is that to, let's say, harvest energy, we need a difference. And my picture is this: if you, for example, if you dug a hole and pull up a stone from down in the hole, and then you can let fall it back and get back the energy, the potential energy. But if you hypothetically live in an area where you have permanent income of sand, which tends with time to fill this hole, then at a point, the possibility to get back this energy from the stone you lifted up is away.
Okay.
Once you are on a level surface with a stone, you cannot get it back. So
yes.
this is without friction, a picture which shows even potential energy doesn't last forever if your environment changes so that the difference in height is away. So what we basically argue is that if we keep up the kite in the air, his death of the universe comes a little bit earlier than it would come otherwise.
Yes. Yeah. Taken to the extreme. Yeah. Essentially, you're taking entropy from the system.
Yeah, because but temperature is I think, if I know it right, the average kinetic energy of the molecules in a gas. I'm not quite sure if this is right, but I think, and if we rise the temperature of it, which wouldn't otherwise be the case, we bring his death a little bit earlier. But on the other hand, the wind would bounce against a mountain or a tree or something else if the kite weren't there. So who cares?
Yeah, really. Yeah, I'd say that's a fair summary.
Yeah, this is my the point at which I arrived now. But yes, his death will come a little bit earlier for the universe by having a kite in the sky.
I suppose technically, maybe technically. Yeah.
Yeah. The question is if we whether we account for the energy that is spent this way as energy we need, because if we would be in a hall with no wind at all, of course the kite would not stay up. We would need some blower who blows in, and this one spends energy, but independent from the kite being there.
Right. And
Okay,
you'd have losses there as well. You get losses everywhere, and losses, all of these losses I'm talking about, like the drag on the fan, the heat from the motor, the fan that's doing the blowing, all of these things. Ultimately,
but if we take the blowing wind for granted, we don't really need to spend energy. The energy is then in the warmed up air. So if we would theoretically, if we would take this warmer air and have some connection, a pipe or something to colder air, we could get some energy of this back.
Sure.
Because if we have a pressure differential and yeah, this is the circular cow again. If we make the surface of the kite very, very smooth, that there is nearly no friction, then we get fully elastic collisions at this point.
Okay, you may get fully elastic collisions, but that doesn't mean the outflowing air has the same energy as the inflowing air.
Then where does it go? This is probably you know this better. Can there be some jitter in the molecules, which, like in the crystal, like in something solid, when something solid get warms, you have movement in the crystalline structure, and
So if we,
this is heat of something solid. But in
well,
air,
I mean, if the kite heated up from the process, yes, but we've discounted any friction. So we're imagining like some kind of perfect no friction scenario. What you've done is diverted the direction of the air.
but I
And that is
think
not technically a loss of energy. That's just a
so.
loss of
Then,
useful
if
energy.
you bounce the steel ball on the table,
Uh-huh.
why does it jump up nearly at the height at what it was?
Because it was a perfectly elastic collision. Yeah.
Yeah, it's elastic collision.
Right.
And then elastic collisions don't lose energy. Or you know
They
these
just
balls which hang from wires,
turn it.
and you leave one ball put on the one end, and the impulse gets so oldie, and the ball at the other end moves away, and this is like a pendulum and moving the momentum through the still hanging balls in the middle. And this is also if they're, of course they would warm up because but as long as the collision is elastic,
perfectly elastic.
perfectly elastic. This is the circular cow. And by the way, some years ago, when this pandemic thing started, Jean Carroll made his video series, The Biggest Ideas of the Universe. Maybe you have seen it or not.
I might have.
And he brings up the circular cow idea at the first or second part. And he said, the advance of Newton was, or also the discussion then was, the old Greeks said, but you will ever have friction. So if you think how things behave, you cannot simply ignore it. And of course, last and finally, you can't do it. But if the friction depends on the smoothness of the kite, and then you cannot say, of course in reality it's always there, but it can be much friction or less friction, and it would need to do the same work or the same, what should I say, the same effort to keep it up, the kite. And if we reduce the friction, which is just a property of the surface, it gets easier to keep this up.
Saying it's just a property of the surface is an
oversimplification,
but yeah, it's a property of the surface and the air.
Together,
air does its own thing that isn't just friction, like turbulence.
But if the air molecules as such can have no jitter between their O2, but that the two atoms store some energy in themselves, and I don't think they do so, because the laws of that the temperature rises if I reduce the volume, the ideal gas law. I think that tells that temperature is nothing else than the average energy in the system.
Yes, that's right.
And therefore,
that's right.
The energy in the air doesn't change. What may change is the option to harvest more energy.
Yes, exactly. Yes, you have nailed it. That is exactly right. At no point is any energy removed. It's just transformed, and it's transformed in such a way that it's no longer particularly useful, or at least it's not useful in the same way that it used to be. Like if we take perfect laminar flow, our spherical cow, perfect flow over the kite, then the air coming out has the same momentum as the air going in. It's just been diverted down towards the earth.
Yeah.
And because instead of going horizontal, it's now going down, we can no longer use it to make something fly. And so it's not as useful, but it technically has the same energy.
Well, that could be even disputed a little bit, because due to the reflection down, it
You
this
could
is rather
steer it back
theoretical,
up.
but we could feed it in a pipe which
Mhm.
drives a little propeller, which would not be driven if the kite wasn't there.
Sure, you could do that if you with your spherical cows. Yeah.
Maybe even in practice you can do this.
Well, in reality, no, because the losses are tremendous. They're not insignificant. The idea of laminar flow, it's hard to get laminar flow to even work. And it's, imagining that I could divert the air like downward by a kite and then catch it with something else and shove it back up, right? Without having essentially turned into heat or sound or, is some other just spiraling vortices, right? You'd have to somehow recover all of that energy.
It may be technically difficult, but think of a large jet plane and a small plane following. How this small plane get bounced around and maybe even crash, and there is lots of energy still in turbulent air. At probably not more, but it's maybe difficult to get this back. But the energy
is there.
is there.
The energy is still there. Yeah, we don't technically lose it, but what we're losing really, I mean, the discussion about energy is a misnomer, though. It's really we start with a kite. A kite needs force to stay aloft.
Yeah.
It doesn't need energy to stay aloft.
Yeah.
There's no energy in the equation. It's force.
Yeah.
And we are aware that there's entropy in this. And it's the entropy that's causing the heat death of the universe, really not the energy.
Yeah.
We don't lose energy even in the heat death of the universe. Our useful work is gone because entropy has increased to the maximum.
But for example, the thing with a kite would be a little bit different. If we put inside the kite, if we put a propeller which turns and creates electricity, and then the kite would also stay up and produce electricity, we may feed down the line and drive a little lead or so, something like that, and then the situation would be different a little bit because the air really loses energy.
Yes.
Because driving this propeller and we can harvest. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, that would be different. So what you just said is, like some kind of kite or something being held aloft by the wind isn't, in our ideal situation, isn't removing any energy from the wind. But if you put a propeller on it to a windmill, you put a windmill. A windmill does. There you go. A windmill removes energy from the wind.
Yeah.
Yes, that's.
And this completely defeats the argument. It must be living things that spend energy to stay in the air.
That's absolutely helium balloon. Done.
Yeah.
Right? The living things is not that's not an
argument. Okay, so
energy is not an answer. It's force. You need a force.
You need a force, yes. And this is what our physics teacher told us. Because our natural understanding and our gut feeling is, if I would keep this mark here and at the same height, I cannot do it forever. And because our muscles work in a way that they spend energy just to keep locked the fibers in the muscles, to lock in this other position, in this contracted position, our body has to spend energy to keep this.
That's right. So where's that energy going?
That's in the body warm.
Yeah, it's just going to heat. Yeah, that reminds me. Ninth grade, in physics class, whatever it was called, physical science in ninth grade, we did this challenge where the teacher had us all go out to the hall, and we're going to run up this flight of stairs. And he would time us running up the flight of stairs. And he said that we would then calculate how much power we were generating. how much energy we were generating. And I argued that it wasn't fair because the stairs weren't perfectly vertical, and our calculations only took the height of the stairs into account. The whole horizontal motion that I was doing, I argued that I was using energy there. Surely that should be in the equation. And yeah, that's where you learn. No, the horizontal running, even though it tires you out, you didn't do any useful work. You didn't. There's no power measured there. It's only the vertical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Physically, how physicists talk about work is different. How we what we account for as work in our daily life. It's even most of my work is sitting there and thinking, and a little how my fingers move over the keyboard is negligible. The work I do there, and I get paid for. So maybe I'm not right with this, but I once heard that if you are really hard thinking, the brain consumes half of the energy your body takes from your foot, and so.
Yeah, I've heard that. I find it. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that that's true. I'd like to see that measured because, my breathing rate, right? It doesn't really accelerate as I think very hard. But if I run or jog or exercise at all, it goes up immediately. And the amount of energy that I'm burning is related to how much oxygen I'm exchanging. I don't think that's actually true, but I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, okay. This is a good argument against this. Yeah, I have a number in my brain, like 35 watt or so, is what the head consumes and has to dissipate. 35. It sounds this approximately right to you?
Right. There was you ever heard the old adage that that like 85% of the heat you lose in the winter is from your head? You ever heard that? I don't know. Maybe it's an American thing.
If you have a well isolating coat and so, I can imagine this. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's only true if you're wearing a coat and not a hat.
Okay. Yeah.
Then it's true. If you're naked, then no, it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. Once when I was in my school days, we had to choose from 4 different in the last 3 years from 4 different kinds of classes, and one of it had to be German education in German language, German literature, and so that we could not choose, and the other one we could freely choose, and I chose math and physics and biology, and not chemistry, what many of my classmates did, and therefore, but it's mostly gone. This biology knowledge is mostly gone now. After it's now 51 years since I left school.
Yeah, seems like forever, right?
Yeah, but math and physics, or the maths, or how would you pronounce it? Maths and physics still, and especially mechanics and such things that we discussed, I find still fascinating. And also, I did a little, I think 1.5 years ago, a little bit of modeling of the optical path in cameras and how the aperture, is it aperture? The opening aperture,
the aperture,
how the aperture influences the depth of view where you get a focused image on the sensor depending on the pixel size and so. And but GeoGebra, I always want to perfect things there, and GeoGebra is very hard to work with if you are a programmer and want to do things like subroutines and reusability for input fields, and so it's very hard to work with. And it's nearly done, this geometrical model, but I never published it. But it gave nice insights how this depth of focused field of view depends on the aperture size, and that if you focus to infinity, you get it's yeah. To get from 1.50 meters or so, you can get a focused image up to infinity very easily, but in the closer range, it's not that easy. Therefore, probably I think how is it done in mobile phones? I always ask myself, do they move the lens and in the distance of the lens
There's
to
those
the
little things. Do they move the lens? That's a really good question. They have to.
But only fractions of a millimeter. These things are not very thick.
Yeah, they're tiny amounts, and that's why they have to put multiple cameras on there now, so that you can have a wide angle and a telephoto, because they don't have much range. Do they move? That's worth research. Do they move, or do they perhaps distort? I'm not sure. They are so small. How could they move? I don't know. We should look that one up. You don't happen to know, do you? Whether a cell phone camera, the lens physically moves and how much it moves?
I have no idea. I've not ever looked into it. The only thing I know is that the famous P900 and P1000 gets their huge zoom because they use very small sensors.
Yeah, I've heard that it has small sensors. Now, why does the small sensor mean it gets more zoom? Is it just because the final, like if you're making a cone to the back of the camera body, that the camera can be smaller because the sensor is small, so that
you fetch the image from the optical path earlier, closer to the lens, and but fit in the same number of pixels in this area, and then you can get a shorter distance.
Okay, so when you say small sensor, you mean the individual like pixels are actually smaller as well?
Yeah.
Okay, that's dense.
And technically, that also I heard this only increases the volume, the noise, not acoustical noise, but the noise in the pixels, and therefore it's not really a good camera, the P900 and P1000. It's only something if you want to impress others with their huge zooming capability.
Yeah, I've heard from photographers that it's not really an ideal camera. I think it really works well in this market, in the crowd that we're frequented with for what they want to do. Yeah, I don't know. I don't own one.
My first camera with high zoom is now already nearly 20, no, not quite 18 years old. It was a Panasonic, and I was aware because my father was an amateur photographer, and I learned as a child. I learned a little bit about photography, and I knew that if you used a tailor lens, it is difficult without a tripod to get a clear picture. And this was maybe not the first camera which had this, but it stabilized the picture. Even if your hands were shaking, you could get high zoom and get a focus picture.
So it was electronic stabilization, or was it
electronic?
Okay.
Electronic.
You must have been a very early one of those 20 years ago. I remember when those were new.
I think they physically moved the sensor a bit. So it, of course, electronic was involved, but also
might have been like a gyro on the sensor.
Yes, this how are these devices called? This with the which does this also the acceleration sensors, and so we today have in drones, and so are based on this. It's a very nice technology.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, when I was in college, we were trying to make a self-flying helicopter back then, and it was a really, really hard problem back when I was in school.
Yeah.
But if I could go back, if I could go back to there with just like a toy quadcopter now, would blow everybody away. Yeah, our gyros were that big, and they weren't nearly as good as things you can get on the microchip now.
I find it a little bit of a misnomer to call these devices, you have these micro devices, gyros, because they have no turning parts inside. And
Right, they're just MEMS. Yeah.
yeah, MEMS. Okay, that's the term.
Yeah.
I am not now any longer that much, but once there was a time when I visited conferences very often and to talk to different people, and I talked to a person who worked as an engineer in such a company which produced these MEMS devices, and they are, because we know from recent events in our neighboring to the east country here, we know that drones may be used as weapons in war, and so the availability of MEMS becomes not
Yeah.
like explosives, but I think they are controlled, and the same is true for GPS. The GPS chips you can buy only work up to a certain speed, and
Right.
then they have the logic in hardware or software, probably in hardware in it, not to work if they move more than 200 or 300 kilometers per hour.
Yeah, and it's to try and avoid people making missiles with them.
Yeah, yeah. It's always twofold with this. This is a little bit deviation, but I sometimes think of this. When I was a child, all this nuclear bomb stuff was very new, and it was often some people often said physicists should have not developed it. They should have kept it secret. Of course, they don't tell you how this should have worked. But
Right.
Oppenheimer, for example, there's even a song. I'm not Oppenheimer's Deadly Toys. I think it's by don't know, the Police or so. Yeah, and the physicists were often blamed that we had nuclear weapons. And now
Right.
consider this. Assume there is something even worse than nuclear weapons, and was discovered, but physicists or also maybe governments decided to keep it secret. And maybe we have, for example, there's also something which is also not a conspiracy, but probably not true. There's a theory that there is a weapon which could eliminate all the nuclear weapons around the world in a second or two. And this would
Okay.
be the last resort if there would be a nuclear war, and therefore we should not have to worry about it. Yeah. And what would you do to keep this discovery secret? And I think the best thing would be to put physicists on a wrong path. And maybe, and I don't believe this. Don't think
Okay. No,
I don't
this
recall
is
it. But
fun.
maybe all
Conspiracy hat.
this CERN stuff or this string theory stuff is exactly the wrong path, which should attract the capable physicists, because they know it leads to nothing, and especially it does not lead to this discovery.
I think that's really interesting. It's an interesting idea. How would you divert academia away from a discovery? Yeah, of course, where that falls down is, since you're actually in academia, or we're in academia, where this falls down is you're presuming that there's some advanced genius that has discovered something so far beyond their peers that they can somehow divert all their peers away from it. But that's not really how it works. I mean, like when the Manhattan Project was a super secret thing developing nuclear weapons, it was based on science of thousands of scientists that were studying in academia, and they knew all about how this theoretically would work. They just hadn't gotten it to work, right? It's so the idea of, yes, okay, I'm going to hide this new technology by diverting people, that would mean that there's some very small group of people who've agreed to do this. And those are the only ones who know anything about this technology that you're trying to hide. What about all their grad students, right? Everybody else.
I think this is a very valid argument against it. And by the way, it's also a reason why I'm meanwhile against granting patents, because I think we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. And we have left the time where a single genius could advance the world by 100 years or so.
Right.
Even Newton, and I think was it Galileo also, the other one. The two had developed a calculus approximately parallel, and Newton got the honor for
Not
it.
Galileo.
No, the other one.
Who was the other guy? Newton and who? Calculus. Leibniz.
Ah, okay. Even a German. Okay.
Yeah, you should have known that one.
Yeah. We have
And
wrote
we
here
actually used
or
Leibniz's notation and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, okay. And also I think Einstein, for example, give it 3 or 4 years, it would have come. Or if you take, for example, the Wright brothers, who get the honor for have discovered flight. If you go in the history, it was around every corner someone tried it, and they figured out how to place the control surfaces the best way to manage the stable flight.
Yeah. Yeah. As an American, go Wright brothers. But to be honest, it should have gone to Blériot. He flew first.
Oh, okay.
The French dude was in the air before the Wright brothers were. The Wright brothers' argument was that they had control surfaces and Blériot hadn't thought that up yet. He was just leaning to steer. And I'm like, dude, that counts.
Yeah. But that leads to the thing why I say we have no lack of discovering things or so, and to grant patents to the one who is first will actually hinder someone to do the same. And like we have with open source software now, we would need a technology pool to which everybody contributes, and everybody gets in open source software. You don't get paid. You do it for your
right.
recognition
In software, I've always been against patents as well. I've always said that we turn things over so quickly in software that if I'm doing something truly better than the next person, that's all the advantage that I need. By the time I have published my work and someone else can rip it off, I've already sold my product and it's over. But in science, I guess the argument is that patents are supposed to make it worthwhile for someone to invest the time and money to do research into something, that money would not get invested unless there was the promise of a marketable product at the end. And if I invested, all that it's going to take to make a quantum computer or something, right? I invest the amount of money, it's going to take to make a quantum computer. And then as soon as I've done that, everyone else can just start manufacturing based on my discoveries, then I'm out that whole investment and I'll never recoup it. So the argument for patents is that we need some way to guarantee that someone who does make a breakthrough can recoup the investment.
Yeah. But there are too many examples for silly things that got patented, not only in software. For example, if you this is a real thing. You have a machine which does process some parts. And you have, if you send in the parts, they have an ID, and you need to identify when this part you put in at that point comes out. And there's actually a patent to do this with an RFID chip. So no one else can produce a machine in which parts go in, identified by an RFID chip, because it's patented. What is the discovering there, or what is the work there done? Nothing.
Yeah, there's patent law needs an overhaul. I'm with you on that for sure. Patents, that's the idea of patents, and I think the idea still is worthwhile, but there's lots of patent trolls and just bogus patents out there. It's a tough one.
They are a trade object. If you violated my patents, then I violate yours. Then you and I will. I will want a lot of money for, and then I also have a patent, you violate it, and then we agree we can mutually use our patents. And that's how patents most of the time work. Or a company which goes out of business because there's no money more, sometimes get bought because people think, oh, maybe there are some patents that Sony or someone else has violated, and we can get a lot of money from them for the sleeping patents there. And I think we have the argument you bring is there, but it would also be there if you build a large bridge. If you build a large bridge, you have a huge of investment, but it is still done.
Well, yeah, but imagine you built the large bridge, and then you have to give that to the public to use. You have to let everyone cross your bridge, and you can't charge a toll for it. Then no one would privately build a bridge.
We have our German traffic infrastructure was, for most of the time, was built from Texas.
Right. That's the only way you could fund that. And
yeah.
I mean, maybe you could argue that's enough, that we don't need private funding of research, that we could just do public funding for all research.
Maybe what you said, that if you have if you know a technology so well, you can easier produce it, although that should be enough to promise a return.
Well, I mean, the usual argument is the drugs, drug companies, and the amount of money that they spend researching new products, and that is not publicly funded.
Okay.
And some cancer medicines or whatever, that's all being privately funded by big pharma, and we hate them and whatever. But if they couldn't then spend the next 5 years, I've forgotten how long it is, let's say it's 5 years, gouging customers to recoup that, then they wouldn't have ever developed that product in the first place. So it makes a certain amount of sense. And I think actually in the drug business, it mostly kind of works, because they do spend a lot of investment, they make a product, and then they have a short window where they own the patent to that. And then it becomes open for generic products after that short window. And I think the product, we could look at different products and what different windows should be for different products. I think that's one of the things is, depending on what you're building, they should get a different window. Like the RFID machine you talk about. If they had maybe 2 years of exclusive rights on that, that'd be cool. They made a new invention. They should get to make machines and be exclusive for a couple years.
It's not an invention to identify a physical object with an RFID chip. That's what they basically. I tell you another
right?
Another thing which is patented. Maybe the patent is only out there to protect against someone else patented. But if your parents or something, if they get older, something you notice very early is that sometimes they forget to turn out the oven. If they have something on the cooking and they turn out and it develops smoke and starts burning. And I encountered this not with my parents, but in my relatives or so several times. And I always asked myself, what is so difficult to put a dead man or dead woman switch on an oven? So you have to press it every 3 minutes, and otherwise the oven gets out.
Right.
And
Well, I mean, I think people would get irritated, but
it sounds a beep after 2 minutes, and you turn to the kitchen and put the button, or it gets out.
okay.
And this idea is patented.
Oh no. Oh no, that's annoying.
And I found it. I don't know whether I don't see it in real ovens and cookers and so.
Mm-mm.
But what they put in now is a Sabbath switch, because if you are a religious Jew, you don't you can't make fire on Sabbath.
Oh my gosh! So
and
you
and
can
and
make your
then you program it so that it cooks and because you have it done before, you know that in they had once when we didn't have electronics so much, they had light switches um, which had a little mechanical delay, because if you switch on the light, it's a spark, and this is making fire,
right.
and this you aren't not allowed to do. And the light switches was constructed in a way you press it, and about, I don't know, 1 or 2 seconds later, it switched. And some religious leader decided that is not making fire, because the fire is delayed to your action. This is silly. This is absolutely silly. Such things.
Oh, that's weaseling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think patent law is a big one, particularly when it comes to software. You and I are both into software,
Yeah.
and the laws that are designed, and maybe they work for drugs, maybe they work for machines. Sometimes they don't work right for software.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
And
for sure.
I don't know what the exact reason is. In maths, patents were never allowed. You could not patent a formula you
You can't
derived, or
patent math. No.
yeah, yeah. And algorithms you can't also patent, and that is the reason why. Do you know a little bit about Unix and Linux? And
I mean, I use them.
yeah, you use them. Okay, then you probably know how the rights, the access rights, are distributed in owner, group, and others, and everyone has a read, write, execute. And
Right.
then we have these strange setuid programs. You know this, or
The set
not?
UID programs.
Setuid. That is the if you specify the access rights in Octal, it would be the fourth digit to the left.
Okay.
You know that you can specify access rights in Octal. You probably know the 666 is read write for everybody. And
I always use the
no,
letters.
please.
I always use the letters, but I love that 666 is the octal code for that.
Yes, it's you have read, write, execute for this
Uh-huh.
three, for yourself, your group, and the others. And if you write it in Octal, the read is the 4, and the write is the 2, and the execute is the 1. And if you add them together,
Nice.
for example, 750 is everything for yourself, and
Right. Okay.
read and execute for the group members.
I
And if
vaguely
you
remember these. Yeah.
and if you
Okay.
the problem in Unix was you needed a file where the passwords are stored. And obviously, this file should not be changeable by everybody.
Right.
But you should be able to change your own password. And now the challenge was, how do we achieve that someone cannot write the password file, etc passwd, or later etc shadow, and but it can, in this file, he or she can change her own password. And this led to programs for which you set this setuid bit. And setuid meant, if you start this program, the system kernel changes your rights to the rights of the owner of this program. And the command passwd, with which you change your password, is such a setuid program, and it is owned by the admin.
Okay.
And if you run passwd, you can change this file, but only with this program. And of course, if you write such programs, you need to have a special eye that they cannot be used in the wrong way. And there are also system calls, which even in those programs, you can say, currently I don't need these extra permissions, and you can switch them on and off, and you can switch back and forth between this, and you should really switch your extra permissions only on while the program needs it, and not all the time, because the longer these are on, the more is the possibility that you don't. For example, on one of the first Linux, or it was before Linux system I taught, they didn't work at the command line, but they had a menu system because it was aimed to office users, and they could start the programs they needed via menu. And there, the spool system for the printer crashed now and then, and the spool system needs to be restartable. And this needed admin permissions.
Yeah.
And so they made this whole menu system, this UID bit, and ordinary user only used it to start their word processor and so, which then run regularly again. But what they overlooked was that if you chose one selection from your menu, you could also put in an exclamation mark and then got a shell window. And this ran with the admin permissions.
Now you're a super user in your own shell.
Yeah, you were a super user. You only need to know, or you only need to try exclamation mark. And then they tried to hide it by setting the prompt for the super user. It's usually the hash, the prompt, and then they tried to hide this by setting the prompt back to $. If you had these permissions, but to the not experienced
but it
user,
didn't look like it.
Nice.
Yeah. Nice.
It was hilarious. So this was. By the way, as we are aware with patents, and so I recently, because of the course I teach, I recently looked up I watched some YouTube videos about clean code. Probably, I don't know whether you teach this or the solid principles. Do you teach them?
Not specifically.
Not specifically. Okay. Yeah. And what was I about today? What is clean code?
Clean code.
Just I lost my train of thought here. No, it was I came from this extra permissions, and no, yes, and from the same channel who made an evaluation of clean code, which was not so well, because he looked at it from the performance point of view, and from the performance point of view, you can argue that code that is clean because it is easy to change and to debug and so is not so performant as it could be. That's not always true. For example, if you use polymorphism, this switches between certain derived classes via the V table. You probably know this, how this works. Or don't know how virtual member functions work.
Yeah, I do. I'm just laughing because that is one of my lectures, is to show. I show the students in the assembly what it looks like when you use a virtual function versus a regular function.
And already the very early processors, long before we had C++, could do this in one machine instruction. The 6809 had one assembler instructions, jump, index, indirect, subroutine, which exactly did what the jump tables do. And and another video of that same person talked about how Linux came up, and that it once was a small operating system a one person could write. And I always think it would only have required a little bit shift of time between two events, that Linux would not have come up, because there was already a follow-up system from Unix called Plan 9. Maybe you have heard this already.
No,
it was later renamed to Brazil, and maybe you now understand that you use movie names for this.
Right.
There was Plan 9
I was wondering if Plan
Space
9 was a reference.
Brazil. By the way, Brazil is one of my real favorite movies because of the ending. You have seen this one? I think it's from the Monty Python crew.
I'm blanking on his name now, but we know it.
Yeah, and this Plan 9 was in some ideas really innovative, and most of these ideas over time have made it into Linux, so we have not lost them. And it was just at the brink when this open source movement started, and AT&T wasn't that far, and they wanted you pay $1,000. No, it was less. I think it was not more than $100. $1,000 was my first C++ compiler I bought in 1989, before all this became free, and they sold it for a reasonable amount. I could buy Plan 9. And if Plan 9 had been a free operating system, and you got the full source code if you bought it, you got it in source code. Yeah, you had only had to invest $100. And if this had come 3 years earlier, or Linux had been 2 years later, probably that would never have taken off. And it had a lot of good ideas in it, which today we have in Linux. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we came from software patents, and what is the time now? Do you still have time? It's getting late for you, I think.
Yeah, I should probably wrap it up.
Yeah.
It's 12:15 here,
okay.
And I usually like to keep these to an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we should probably come to a conclusion. I do one story I think might be interesting for the viewers who tuned in to some aerodynamics and also this patent discussion. If you're not aware of the Curtis versus Wright story, are you aware of that one, Martin?
No.
The Wright brothers got the original patent for the flying machine, right? But the company came to be known as Curtis Wright, not Wright anymore. It wasn't the Wright flyer anymore. It was the Curtis Wright. They didn't keep the first name. And the story is that Curtis, a competitor, started making airplanes. And of course, the Wright brothers sued them because they had the patent on it. And so Curtis's defense in court was to take someone's previous work. I forgot who it was now. Took somebody's previous work that didn't fly. One of the famous ones that you see in the black and white movies that just crashed into the water, and fix it, because by now they knew how to make it work. And he took it and he fixed it, and he showed the court and he said, "See, this previous guy already had it. If he had just done this with it, it would have flown just fine." And so the Wright brothers patent is not valid. And the Wright brothers, sure enough, the American courts sided with Curtis in a travesty of justice, because it was a sham. I mean, everybody now, historians agree, it was a total sham. But because the American government needed airplanes for the war, they sided with Curtis, and Curtis was able to make airplanes and eventually just buy the Wright brothers factories from them.
There are maybe this is also because I should reconsider my position to patents, because the bad stories are spread much further than the good stories. When you told this, I just remembered the situation between FM and AM radio. I think the inventor of FM radio committed suicide at a point, if I'm remember it right. And the big radio companies in USA always said, you don't need it, you don't need FM, and this better quality, and so who wants it, and so he could not sell this to the radio stations because of this. And later on, when he was dead, they just took the idea. I don't know if there was a patent. Probably there was. Otherwise, they would have picked up FM earlier, because it has only advantages. Maybe it works better at the higher frequency ranges. That's why we have it in above or around 100 megahertz and not below. Yeah. Okay. Okay, you wanted to wrap it up, and
Yeah,
for me
we
the same, and
should call it for
maybe
tonight, I think.
yeah, maybe I have some other things. Maybe I do a show alone one day, but now and then I think we should repeat such a
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah, it was great talking to you. And I think several people have said they enjoyed the show, so
Okay,
it was great talking to you, and
thanks. It is
we'll do it
same for
again
me
soon.
too. Okay, goodbye then, and have a
All right.
nice night and a nice Sunday tomorrow. And for me today, it's already Sunday, as you see from the light behind.
Well, actually, it's Sunday for me now too.
Ah,
So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Goodbye.
all right, bye. How do I turn this thing off?
Yeah.